What is important is our next speaker. Joe Nickell is our next speaker, the unbelievably famous and accomplished man that is Joe Nickell. And these 4 questions what I asked him. The skill he would like to have is juggling, which I totally agree with. The item he would rescue out of his burning house was a handwritten recipe book that his mom made for him. And she made this for him when he was on the lam from the FBI to make sure that he was well fed. Isn't that fantastic? I just love that. As to pirates versus ninjas, he has no opinion. And finally, when I said cake or pie, Joe said yes. So forensic science solves the paranormal. Here he is, Joe Nickell.
Okay. Can you hear me all right? Oh, that's too bad. Well, no, I guess that'll do. Does that sound good? A funny thing happened to me on the way here. I was standing in line at lunch, and I tipped my plate, and the food went all over me, and it left an ugly place, and I had to wash it off and everything. I had a choice to go to my room and get on another sport coat and skip lunch, or, well, of course, you know what I did. I have to keep up my strength. So you don't notice this ugly wet spot here. You may notice that occasionally I'll strike a pose. How does this look? Or I may use my magician's skill of misdirection. Oh, look. You see why. And I want to thank both of you for laughing over that. I brought Margaret Downey. I brought Margaret Downey because she will laugh at anything, and so I always like to have her stationed strategically when I'm giving a talk. Okay, so that just to explain the occasional laughter, which probably doesn't make any sense in the middle of something serious I'm saying, or my occasional poses. Well, as you know, most people's talks are thinly disguised commercials for the books they've written. This talk will be no exception. I want to talk about crime science and forensic science and the paranormal, but let me back up a little bit just to tell you, because some of you don't actually know me or my work, I've found, to my great disappointment, having come here. And I wanted to, for those who are more on the atheist side, yes, I am an atheist. I like to say I'm a humanist. That's an atheist with a heart. I'm trying to be positive, you see. I said that one young guy said, are you saying that we atheists don't have a heart? And I said, no, I'm just saying it's a negative statement. And if you want to be positive, it's sort of like saying, what are your politics? And you say, well, I'm not a Republican. Yeah, well, I'm not a theist. No, what are you? And see, if you say, I'm a humanist, you've said, I believe in human rights and human values and so on. I think it's a very good thing. I recommend it. And so I say, if you are an atheist with a heart, then you should just call yourself then not an atheist but a humanist. I leave that with you for whatever it's worth. I began this particular work that I do, and I'm with Committee for Skeptical Inquiry at the Center for Inquiry. And our mission is to investigate those things at the fringes of science, things like quack medicine, Bigfoot, and the like. Things that we might, much of it is where I'm most concerned, is things we would call paranormal. And maybe that term could use some definition. Paranormal doesn't mean two normals. That isn't. So if that's what Brian Dunning told you, it's just wrong, and that's why he gets 90%. But no, I don't know what he said. Anyway, paranormal usually means those things beyond the normal range of science and human experience. For example, Bigfoot. Now, it's distinguished from the supernatural in the sense that it includes all of the supernatural necessarily, but then it might include such other things as Bigfoot, which, if Bigfoot were real, and we can get to that in question period if you want, but if Bigfoot were real, he might be a perfectly flesh and blood creature and not supernatural at all, right? You get the distinction? So paranormal is the broad umbrella that includes supernatural and those things that are beyond the normal range of science and human experience. And I want to tell you a little bit about how I got into this line of work. Did I use the word work? This line of fun. No, this is being recorded. This line of work, it's difficult and dangerous work. So I got into this quite by accident. As a child, I didn't know what I wanted to do for sure, but by the age of 8, I knew I was a detective. By the age of 11 or so, I was Sherlock Holmes. I mean, I really was. I wanted to do other things. There was a time when I discovered girls and went to college and things, but eventually I got back on track. And I realized at some point, and the irony here is, and George alluded to this, I really was wanted by the FBI for 8.5 years. I was a federal fugitive. And the reason is no homicides, no daring bank robberies, though that would have sounded good. But I was actually opposed to the war in Vietnam and refused to report for induction. I mean, it was even worse than that. I was tear gassed at the Pentagon with Norman Mailer and those other guys. We tore down the fence and stormed in and were driven back by tear gas. So I was a real troublemaker. But all is well and good. And on his first day in office, Jimmy Carter gave me a full presidential pardon. And along with others. Wasn't just for me. And I was at a kind of, during that period in Canada, I had, I don't say this, hopefully not in a maudlin way, but I had lost my family for a brief while. I had certainly lost my country. I had lost my good nature. I soon lost my wife, not over that. We're still friends, and she supported my decision 102%. But it was sort of a crisis in my life, and to get through things, I went back to one of my other childhood interests, which was magic. My father was always an amateur magician, performed locally some, and got me up on stage once as a very little boy to do a magic trick, and that was that. You hear that applause, and well, that's all you need. You see, you know you're a performer. So, it became an irony. I became a magician in Canada, and that's where I knew. Most of you know, right? James the Amazing Randi. We've been friends for 40-some years, and I knew. So many other, Doug Henning, remember the young Doug Henning, so talented. We were good friends. So I was a magician for about 3 years, worked to perform for disadvantaged children. They might be handicapped, immigrant children, children dying of leukemia. Could be any situation other than a normal, white middle-class suburban group. And for the summers, I was the resident magician at the Houdini Hall of Fame in Niagara Falls. And there I would see Randy. When he came to town, he would always come and put in an appearance. And then I decided one day, I had heard about the most famous haunting in Canada, Mackenzie House. And I thought, well, if Randy can investigate things, I could investigate things. So I went to Mackenzie House. And people were hearing, for example, some of you know this story probably too well, but some of you haven't heard it. I went to McKenzie House, and in fact, among the phenomena there, people were hearing footsteps on the stairs late at night when there was no one in the house and the house was locked. Do we need any more proof of ghosts than that? Okay, you'd like a little more? Yeah, okay. Well, I was pretty sure that that was investigatable. So I went to McKenzie House, and pretty soon I had found a tour guide who said, you know, I think I know what's causing that. She said, one day I heard it during the day. Now, usually people were hearing it at night, but because it was quiet at night, you see, the street sounds and the horns blowing and stuff were all very quiet, and you could hear the footsteps, real footsteps it sounded like, on the stairs. And she said, this happened one time during the day, and she just happened to be there by the staircase, which was over against one wall. And she said, you know, sir, I think there's a staircase next door. This is pretty shocking stuff, right? I mean, I'm going to pause here while you let that sink in. Because for something like 10 years, this phenomenon had gone on. There were the obligatory Halloween stories there. There was an exorcism. You get the idea. But I went next door and found the caretaker, and sure enough, there was an iron staircase parallel to McKenzie Houses about 40 inches away. So when you heard the footsteps on the stairs over there, you couldn't tell 40 inches difference. And there was a late night cleanup crew and the caretaker and his family and others to play ghost. Unintentionally, of course. I asked the caretaker, Tony, I said, why didn't you come forward? He said, well, he didn't think it was his job to rain on people's parade, but he had said to himself that if someone came and asked him, he would tell them what he knew. And I said, you don't mean to tell me that I'm the first guy in 10 years that's good? Yes, you are. You're the first one. And so I'm rambling about to sort of get you to understand my journey in getting to where I am here. I thought, wow, this is what you do. Now, there were other things to learn there, and I had to learn, those had different explanations, but they were all doable primarily because I went to the site. I was not sitting in an armchair. I was not getting my answers off of Wikipedia. In fact, Wikipedia didn't exist. Or I might have been misled and not had the life I've had. I had to actually go places. Now, I don't say any of this to be critical of anyone else's approach. There are different approaches to the paranormal, different things to do. But mine has been to go on site when possible and investigate. If there's no site to go to, like you couldn't go to Turin and see the Shroud of Turin, it's kept in a box. I have been there and done that, but that doesn't help you solve anything. But there are wonderful photos now available, and I could roll up my shirt sleeves. More misdirection, you see. I could roll up my shirt sleeves and make an attempt to make a shroud-like image that was said to be impossible. You know, it's supposedly a photographic negative and no one can explain it. And I showed a way it could be simply done with techniques in the middle of the 14th century. So that was an approach that very early on I adopted. Now, let me say also, there really weren't any textbooks. There were, maybe Randy had a book or two out. Milburn Christopher, maybe you've never heard of him, but he's a big influence on me. He wrote a book, ESP Seers and Psychics, What the Occult Really Is, and a companion book, and was a great influence on me because he was trying to go to haunted houses. Randy was mostly dealing with people who claimed special powers, and I wanted to do it all. And I wanted to figure out what was the explanation behind these mysteries. So I didn't want to become a debunker, per se. People flatter me all the time. Oh, Nickell's one of the great debunkers. And I say, please don't call me that. Because it's not my intention to debunk. That sounds very much like the flip side of the true believer. What I want to do is figure out what I think is, and can convince you might be, the most likely explanation for something. And if I can, and if you believe me, the debunking just takes care of itself, you see. So that's where I'm coming from. So here I was, a magician, and I'm now, as a sort of hobby, I'm investigating on the side, McKinsey House and other mysteries. And I realized that what I really needed to do was go back to my first love. Remember, I was a detective at 8. And so I went to the world's oldest and largest private detective agency, the world famous going after the Jesse James gang people, the Pinkertons, because I wanted to start at the top and work my way down. Not the other way around. That was for other people. Work your way up. So I went into Pinkertons, and I was hired, of course. And I was, over the next 2 years, I was being trained and twice promoted and doing all sorts of investigatory things like shadowing and roping and other techniques that secret agency stuff. But most of my work was doing undercover work, and I would infiltrate theft gangs and the like, and we would catch them at their tricks. And obviously, I began to draw on my magic background for illusions. For example, lake monsters that 30 feet long might be 1, 2, 3, 4 otters swimming in a line, creating an incredible illusion, which I learned from a wildlife expert who saw it while hiding in a duck blind on Lake Alice. Now, this is the use of, or you could say the McKinsey House footsteps on the stairs, right? Magician's illusion. Unintentional, but an illusion. Well, I wanted to know how to do investigative work, how to interrogate people or interrogate them without them knowing I was interrogating them. It's called roping in the business. And so on. Eventually, I began to do more and more of this, began to publish books and articles, still, though, as an avocation while doing other things. I mean, once I was a blackjack dealer in the Yukon. I don't know how really relevant that was, but it did teach me the virtues of holding on to your money. And finally, after Carter's pardon, I went back to the States, became a student at Paul Stater's Hollywood Stunt School for a year. Let me say this, frankly, not the smartest thing I ever did. But I was hurt occasionally, but I survived. And I learned a lot more about another whole set of illusions and mindsets and so forth. And finally decided to be taken seriously by people of your discrimination. I needed to get an advanced degree or two, and so I went back, and I now have a couple of degrees in English literature and folklore. I'm not a scientist, so why is this book, Crime Science, up there? Well, I've got a strong interest in forensics. I could sit down and talk for hours to a fingerprint expert, and we would be on the same page and have a nice... So I know a little bit about a lot of the forensics, and enough that I can be a forensic writer. The John Fisher there is the actual forensic expert who, let me say, kindly can't write very much. That would be his own. So we were made for each other, and we did this book, which was a textbook at Johns Hopkins and elsewhere. So this gets me kind of to where we are now. Oh, I've used up all my time, and I'm afraid we'll actually, no, I'm just kidding. So let me talk to you today about how I've tried to use just this narrow field of applying forensic science to the paranormal. So a lot of what I've told you, you see, was applying magic or something else. Psychology, of course, very important. My work with Robert Baker, who I miss every day. Of great, great man. But I want to, I'll start with the 1987 case of the Atlanta House of Blood. This is just a picture of me in my little lab at CSI, which has sort of a double meaning now, you see. And I did a little book about this called CSI Paranormal, little in-joke. But I do some limited things here. But I'm very serious about this. If I need a scientist, I go get one. I don't play beyond my knowledge, or I don't mean to. But sometimes I can spot something and then I just need an expert to tell me, yes, you're right. Or, for heaven's sake, Nickell, I'm glad you didn't put that into print. You know, that one or the other. Okay, so blood pattern analysis, I applied that to the Atlanta House of Blood. Now, that was a mystery in 1987 when an elderly couple contacted the police and said that blood was appearing, and I think you can see some of it in this slide. Can you see that all right? I can't see what you're seeing. Oh, we don't have the, okay, that's the next slide, sorry. I apologize, I have an incompetent person handling my PowerPoint. Why are they laughing? It's a mystery to me. So in this case, the elderly couple was claiming that they saw blood oozing out of the walls and springing up like a fountain from the floor and so forth. And this was getting a lot of attention. It was fairly quickly dispensed with by the police, who arrived and said, you know, there's really nothing, there's no crime or anything happening here. And but people were urging me, you better go deal with this because it's starting to take on the sort of long-term mythological case where it's now was unsolved by police. It's a mystery that can't be solved. You get the idea. And I better go before it was too late, because this already, of course, was cleaned up and a few years down the pike. So friends of mine in Atlanta arranged for me to meet with the Atlanta Homicide Task Force. Those are the people that went after and caught Wayne Williams. And if there's anyone here who thinks Wayne Williams didn't murder those young people, you're mistaken and I need to talk to you. I personally spoke at length with Larry Peterson, who did the actual fiber analysis, was at a conference with him at the Macron Laboratories, which found the tempera paint on the Shroud of Turin. So I was traveling in that circle occasionally, forensic circle, and that was, Wayne Williams was absolutely guilty. So anyway, so I sat down with the commander, and he wanted to know just what I was up to, what was I about. My advanced people, the Georgia Skeptics, had built me up real big, famous author, that sort of thing. And so he was predisposed to sort of think I might be okay, and I told him. He said, you know, at the outset, though, he said, well, we've looked for that file, and it appears to be misplaced, and I can't seem to lay my hands on it. But as soon as I convinced him that I was a respectable person with a respectable goal, he said, let me have another look for that file. And I would say about 45 seconds later, he had the file and made it available for me to look through. And I sat there looking at these crime scene photographs, and I couldn't understand why the couple was saying what they're saying, because it seemed to me they were not telling the truth. So I could see right away that blood pattern analysis would be helpful. It so happened that I knew Judith Bunker. Judy was a friend. We worked on several cases together. And at that particular moment, Judy sort of owed me a favor. So I didn't hesitate to contact her and explain how this was an important case. You have to explain these things to people so they understand why you're not going to pay them a single dollar, right? You understand? This is sort of understood in forensic work. There's a kind of a technique to this that I've attempted to master. And Judy wrote me this wonderful report, and it said basically that this was squirted onto floors and baseboards. That is, it didn't come from there out, as the couple had said in some detail, that what they had said they saw they could not have seen, and that someone had flung it onto. Is that clear? But that needed to be said by an expert, and she did that. I learned from the police confidentially, but enough time has gone, I think I can now tell you, that they thought this elderly couple was simply looking for attention. And that's the house of blood. Had I not had the option of blood pattern analysis, take that away from me, and you see that this case, which is quite simple to solve, and I'm sure some of you were saying, oh yeah, we knew that. That was obvious. Dr. Watson, used to say that to Sherlock, and then Sherlock said once, yes, but everything is obvious after it's been explained. Words to that effect. Well, anyway, here is another slide. You see that it's squirted onto. The man in the house was on dialysis, but this was neither of their blood types. But they could have easily picked up a bag of blood while he was having his transfusions, or some other person, family member or something, might have been doing it. But it was pretty clear they were doing it because they were lying, you see. Really a very precise explanation, I think. Now, forensic light sources. We've all heard, right, about ultraviolet and infrared and argon laser light and so forth. In forensics now, they just refer to forensic light sources and often have gadgets that are tunable. You can go from sort of, along the spectrum, because you don't know what things look different under different lights. You've noticed this, right? You go from an incandescent light where maybe a stain on your coat is not very noticeable, and you go under a fluorescent light and it's very noticeable, and you realize light matters. And this case comes from 1995, about the middle of 1995, when approximately 40 people were led to a seance, a dark room seance in Lexington, Kentucky, by a medium, or a small. Thank you for laughing at that. Hope springs eternal. I knew sooner or later someone would laugh at that joke. And it's been years. No. So the case was that these people sat in a dark room, and they were shown, before the lights went out, they were shown some blank pieces of cloth. The medium had it in his pocket, and he showed these blank cloths, little squares of cloth like this. And then he showed a bottle of ink, and he unscrewed it and set it on the table, and then they turned out the lights. And they began to sing hymns and to conjure up the spirits. And he told people they had a personal spirit guide, and that their spirit guides could be seen. They could make themselves visible through this method. And he passed out these blank cloths to people, and they sat and held them in their lap, and they were told they might feel tugging on the pieces of cloth, but not to be upset. It was their friendly spirit guides. And when the lights came on, here you see one of these swatches of cloth with the faces of these sort of thumbprint-sized spirit guides. And they, out of 40 sitters, each paying about $20, he made $800 in that. Now this was back in mid-1995 when that was actually some money, $800. I know today you'd hardly bend over to pick it up, but unless you're me on my salary, and I would. But I had one of the victims, and that's the right word, one of the victims came to me, and she said, that she hardly got home, and she thought, I've just been hoodwinked. And she was very angry about this. And a victim, feels a certain way. It makes them feel any kind of victim. So I have a policy of not laughing at victims. And I'll get to that in a minute because police and others don't always have that attitude. So she got into this and, went to the public education station. She knew somebody or something, and she went to them, what could I do about this? And they didn't know, and they sent her to, she first went to a district attorney who pretty much, waved her off, laughed her off. And then she went to KET, Kentucky Educational Television, and they sent her to me, go figure, and said I would probably know what to do. And I did. And at that time, and I of course took command of her swatch of cloth. I took it as evidence, and I had her write an affidavit of this, and we notarized it. And I was at that time working with that police department on a couple of homicide cases. It was one of the great pleasures of my life that while I was in graduate school, my forensic friend and I solved a very important old cold case. And after that, the police department there was very happy. I could come in any time, and they would call me if they had something where they thought my type of thinking could be helpful, and I really, really liked it. So we were talking about a case, a homicide case, and we got through, and I said, can I bring up this case? And he sort of started to laugh a little bit at how gullible people were, and I just stopped him, and I said, yes, it's true that these people were very gullible, and they did not have enough critical thinking, but that doesn't mean they deserve to be criminalized. And he said, no, you're quite right. You're quite right. And he said, tell me a little more about the case. So I did. He said, what have you got? What have you got? And I stood up and took my briefcase, and he had this big desk. And I said, I have physical evidence. And I laid out this swatch of cloth. And I have an affidavit from the person. And I have crime lab reports and forensic reports. And I have a book that shows the recipe for making these. And I laid this, and he said, okay. He said, you're really hot about this. And I said, very much, because I said, this has already practically broken up one marriage, and I've had to talk to these people who feel very much like they've been humiliated, and I'm not happy about it. As a result, well, I'm getting ahead of an interesting story, so let me show you. So we looked at this in a forensic laboratory, that swatch I showed you, and infrared was not helpful. Ultraviolet was not helpful. But argon laser light, now I can't, from where I am, use a pointer, but can you see a sort of stain around those pictures? Can everybody see that? Nod your heads vigorously, yes, if you can. This is very helpful to me. There's no stain there. I've just, used hypnosis. No, I'm kidding. Okay, so you can see the solvent stains. And when we found a recipe that told how to use a solvent and a hot iron or the back of a spoon as a burnisher and transfer newspaper or magazine pictures to the cloth, you see how this is working? Also, if we go back, let me try this and go back, if it doesn't explode. Okay, when you look at these pictures, I did this analysis sitting down and having a think session with a photographer. Can you not see that these, take the big face on the left, can you not see that was photographed with a directional light, that the light came from the upper right and left a shadow on his cheek? Can you all see that? And you see the woman is wearing eyeglasses and earrings. Now, I'm not saying they don't wear those in the spirit world, boys and girls. No, boys and girls, I'm not saying that. Just that, seems a little, well, enough said. And the one at the bottom, you see this irrelevant background material. What's that about? Does this figure go around with that sort of hanging there all the time? Or why does it just show there? You know, I'm asking questions like that. And of course, as it turns out, we see why there are solvent stains. Now this one, and yes, that's Pat Sajak. Yes, I made this one using that recipe. How do you think I did? Please tell me it's better than 90%. I'm crushed. So this was the case, and I was able then to get police warrants for the arrest of this person on multiple misdemeanor charges, but we were not able to get a felony charge because he was clever enough, did I mention, to only charge $40 each, which kept it under. And we could not extradite him, and all we could do then was to bring in, get the word out and warn him that he was through coming to Lexington, Kentucky. Microscopy, this case, I'll just deal with this very briefly. This is a case that happened after I was on Oprah. I was on, I believe this is correct, Oprah's first live broadcast. You know, her shows previously were recorded, they were live on tape, and then the tapes were distributed and syndicated. But she had on an Easter, I think it was 1995 Easter, if I remember correctly, a live show. It was a big deal. And I was on as the voice of, debunking, I guess, to debunk things like miracles and so forth, the topic of the show. And I did my job there, and afterwards I was sitting in the limousine waiting to go to the airport, and a lady said, "Have you seen this?" And she showed me this rose petal. Can you see the face of Jesus? I can't tell how well that's... Is that clear enough? Yeah, it's hard for me to see here what you're seeing very well. There are these markings. Let me try this. Hold on. Now, okay. So I used I never go anywhere without, unless I did it today, my Bausch & Lomb Illuminated Coddington magnifier, which is a pen-lighted loupe. I just carry it everywhere, and I use it all the time. And it will often tell you right away that's a reproduction print, or that's a forged signature, or whatever. And in this case, I was intrigued by this picture. Was this a simulacrum? That is, just a random picture? Or was this something more criminal or dishonest or fake? So I asked the lady if I could borrow it, and to my shock, she let me borrow it. We exchanged business cards, I think, and so forth. Anyway, she let me borrow it. And as I studied this, and again, I don't have my laser pointer, but can you see that a lot of these markings, like look over the eye on your right side, do you see those, or up in the hair, do you see little short marks like this, little short linear marks? And do you see the long linear, 3 linear marks down the left side? Everybody see those? You can pick up some more, but you see there's a linear quality to this. And if you could see this under a stereo microscope back at my lab, you would see that everywhere there's one of those linear strokes, there's actually physically damage to the rose petal. You can see the damage. It's hard to see it in 2 dimensions. That's why the stereo microscope is so useful. You can see the slightest difference in depth and really focus in. So I got a bunch of rose petals, and I looked to see if any of them had any kind of pattern that you might, if you selected out of 100, you might find a Jesus face. And I didn't see any such markings of any kind on rose petals. And so after I noticed these lineal marks, I used a stylus, like you see up in the left, a blunt stylus, and I made these. Rather handily. Now these are very small, so they're like doing little miniatures, but I think mine are of similar quality. Would you say 91%? Something like that. Okay, this is a Margaret. This is a tough audience. You know, this is a tough bunch. So I want to move on now to fingerprinting, and this is the case of the 2 Will Wests. This was a favorite case of mine when I was a a young boy studying fingerprinting. And the story is that one day at Leavenworth Penitentiary, when it was called the Indian Territory of Oklahoma. It wasn't Oklahoma, it was Indian Territory. 1903, and this guy, Will West, was brought in on a charge of manslaughter. At that time, fingerprinting was not yet in use in America. In fact, a lot of people thought it was the funniest thing they ever heard of, that these squiggles on your fingers would identify anything. They just thought it was hilariously, stupidly funny. And so they were using instead, I'll get back to the pictures below, but the top are pictures of Will West. And so they were using a cumbersome system called Bertillonage. They would measure the bony structure of the body. Jeannie Scott will now come up and give a 15-minute lecture. Oh, no, we're running short. Next time, Jeannie, thank you. On Bertillonage, but it's basically physical anthropology. You're measuring the bony structure. And it was not perfect, but it was helpful in sorting out people once you've reached adulthood. And you could measure their physical measurements, take a photograph of their ear and any distinguished marks and so forth, and it was a lot better than nothing. And so they ran Will West through the process, and they came out with the pictures you see on the bottom. Worse, it said William West. And the Bertillon measurements were very, very, very close. Now, it won't be identical if you measure the same guy. Two different people measure them because you might press the calipers a little tighter or something. But to all intents and purposes, these are very similar measurements. Now, there have been cases of famous lookalikes. For example, the guy on the left was a man called Adolf Beck. And I refer to him as poor Adolf Beck because Adolf Beck served out one prison term and almost served out a second one for the crimes of the man on the right, a swindler known as William Thomas. Now, do they look alike? Well, no, they don't look alike to a portrait artist. But they are, let me see if I can make this understandable. They are the same type. Big, burly guy with a walrus mustache, right? You see that? So if you saw one of them briefly and then a month or two later you saw the other one under police guard, you might think, you got him. See, because you didn't have them to compare. You with me? If not, we're all lost. The ship is sinking. But notice their fingerprints are not in any way similar. Okay? You can see that without being fingerprint experts. No similarity. But look at the Will West's fingerprints, because the guy who challenged Will West and said, look, here's your card, here's your name, come on. He said, that looks like me, but that's not me. I don't know what that is. So they checked around, and William West was still in prison. They thought, no, he's escaped. Oh, is this really, part of this is a true story factually. Part of it has been a little fudged with. But so they brought them together, and they could not tell them apart. They said that they were like two peas in a pod. And this is written up and is famous in the history of fingerprinting, pretty much till I came along, decades later, as the case of the most amazing resemblance of two unrelated people in all of human history. Remember, they look a lot alike. And so what's the answer here? Now, this is a particularly bright group, so I want you to just take a moment out of your busy schedule and tell me what happened here. That's too long. It's too long. I want a brighter group. Huh? No, I mean, what's the explanation for this incredible set of coincidences?
One of the photographic groups is
No. These are, who said that? Would you stand, please? Could we have a round of applause? But wait, what if she's wrong? No, it's fine, because that's exactly what I thought. I thought, look, these are twins separated at birth, and they've both had lives of crime, and they've been caught in the same big prison in the same area. Pretty good hypothesis, never mind that people were saying, no, they weren't at all doing anything, they didn't know about each other. They were totally unrelated. Will West and William West, really? I mean, you've known twins, right? So Billy and Willie, right? Pretty sure that's how that went. I mean, I'm going back in time some and kind of guesstimating and so forth. But what had happened is that when I got this case, I grew up with this as a child. I had this case practically memorized, and I believed it. And then I became a skeptic, and one day I came across this case again, and I thought, well, darn, I don't believe that. And I started out, the FBI was willing to give me a copy of the old files, so I had their pictures, their fingerprints, their birth and measurements, and so forth. I wrote to Professor Moinsons, who was a criminal law professor, and I used that adjective slightly wrong, didn't I? He was a law professor in dealing with crime. And he said, this is great that you're going to take this on. It's a great hypothesis. Let me know if you get results. And I got the results. I had two fingerprint experts in Toronto's twin register who studied the genetic traits in twins' fingerprints. They said, for sure, astronomical. And they made their judgment separate. Astronomical odds. I took their ear pattern. The world's foremost expert in ear comparison said, I've never seen two fraternal twins with ears this close. I stake my reputation. These are identical twins, monozygotic twins. An expert in twins measurements said well within the range. They could have been even more different and been identical twins. I had the guy who developed a dentakit where you put together eyes, nose, mouths to make composite crime pictures. And he said the face of one is the face of the other. That's how similar they were, which you can see is pretty much your judgment. Now, mind you, they don't look exactly like the same person. Twins don't. And these pictures were made a few years apart. One may look a little more gaunt to you or something. But basically, this is an incredible thing. And finally, I found an abstract, a list of their correspondence record and an affidavit. The affidavit was from a prisoner named George Bean, who deposed that he knew both Will West and also Bill West, and of his personal knowledge, knew them to be, quote, twin brothers. Oh, wait a minute, they knew. And then their correspondence record showed that while in prison, they wrote to the same brother, the same four sisters, and the same Uncle George. And this evidence was lying there gathering dust for decades. And I said simply, wait. So you see how you can do this. So Professor Moinsons helped me, and I published in the Journal of Police Science. And I was invited to the big International Association of Identification annual meeting. This is the fingerprint experts of the world. And I thought, boy, they'll tear me to pieces. They did not. They said, well, son, you solved that. And it was a great thrill. Okay, I'm going to end with one more case. I know I'm running short. You probably have a couple of questions. Let me see just how many questions there are. Wait. 3, I think. Could be wrong. This is a case of an alien, a hybrid alien, but I'm going to skip over it and just tell you that this case was in Saxony, Germany, and was just a deformed fetus, but it was on the internet as a big alien deal. But I wanted to share with you this case on crime scene reconstruction. You've heard of spontaneous human combustion. What on earth happened to this poor lady? You have 15 seconds. Yes, I keep hearing the word fireplace. Is this spontaneous human combustion, or did this woman trip, as I suppose, notice one shoe is missing, and fall head forward into the fireplace. Notice the corroborative evidence of the grate. The fireplace grate has been knocked to the left, and sparks showered upon her body. Why did she burn so thoroughly? Why were nearby objects not burned? This is a mystery of spontaneous human combustion. My forensic friend and I did a lot to get that in the forensic literature, including in the fire investigation manual and so on. And what we determined here was that the body of a heavy-set person has a lot of body fat, and this fat will melt. It's very flammable, is absorbed by clothing or carpeting, and makes what's called the wick effect, which causes it to burn slowly and thoroughly to release more body fat, to produce more burning of the body in a cyclic way. And that has now been forensically confirmed. We didn't invent it, by the way. We just advanced that theory with a lot of case studies. And so why the nearby objects didn't burn is it's never a big fire. So yes, the ottoman there didn't burn in the same way you could get up close to a campfire and not burn. Up to a point, you see. Quite close. Let me stop there and thank you for your kind attention and the 91% rating.
Joe Nickell, you know what? We have time for one really, really fantastic short question. Is it really fantastic? This is a great, folks. Okay, gird your loins, kids.
Do people still go to the McKinsey house and still believe? Do people still go to the McKinsey house and do they still believe?
You know, I've not kept up with all my cases to see what happens momentarily, but the people at McKinsey House were helpful to me later when I needed some measurements taken and stuff that I hadn't done at the time. And they followed up on some things for me and were very, very helpful. And it is the preferred hypothesis. I'm not even sure if that building's still there. This is many, many years ago. And I know I should go back to all these places and revisit them and have people yell at me all over again. But I'm inclined to sort of move on rather than backtrack. But I do have an article with Robert Bartholomew in the new issue of Skeptic magazine, our competitor, by the way. No, but we're all friends in skepticism. And we have an article in Skeptic magazine on the 40th anniversary of Amityville. Thanks again. Oh, forensic. I thought everybody knew that, so I didn't, but good point. Forensic refers to law and debate, and so the sciences that might be debated or judged before a court of law would be called forensic matters, and the science would be such sciences like fingerprinting used in court cases to adjudicate things. I think that's a fair definition.
Joe Nickell, ladies and gentlemen. Joe Nickell. No, we're out of time. Sorry. Talk to Joe afterwards, yeah. That's what's lovely about these little conferences. You can walk up to Joe and you can accost him in person. So, yes. Thank you so much. Congratulations. Nicely done. All right.